This is a TalkStation original podcast.
On this week's episode of the Paperboys podcast, JJ Smith and I talked to WCTI sports director and reporter Brian North about his background in broadcasting and his career in Eastern North Carolina. It all starts right now on the Paperboys podcast.
Hello and welcome to the Paperboys podcast. I'm JJ Smith.
And I'm Zack Nally.
We're reporters with the Carteret County News-Times. We're joined by our producer, Ross Caraway. This is our 10th episode, and when you hit a gargantuan milestone like that, you have to get a guest that can meet the moment. And I think there's only one guest in all of Eastern North Carolina who can meet that moment, and it is Brian North.
That's horrible. I'm the 10th guest and you try to butter me up like that. That's horrible. 10th guest. I'm your 10th guest. Not number one. No, not number two. Nope, number 10. That's cool.
Well, we were waiting for like a major, major milestone. We were hoping to wait till like 100, but let's all be honest. This is not going to 100.
We had to make sure we got enough listeners first.
Yeah. I was the only one who would answer the phone this week. I get it.
Yeah, I mean, a few people didn't respond to my text, so. No, one reason we did wait until this period to get Brian on, and Brian is a sports anchor with WCTI 12, and we'll dive into his bio a little bit later, is last week was the first week of high school football. And if there's any time a television sports reporter looks forward to, I would imagine it's high school football season. Me and Zach have seen you on the sidelines for forever, and other guys and ladies you're working with on the sidelines. And I think we are, and most people are, kind of fascinated with how the Friday night highlight shows come together. Brian's is called The Blitz, and he's been doing it for, I don't know, about like 50 years or something.
Yep, year number 26 here at the Blitz, year number, 30-something just covering high school football. So, no, it's great. I wouldn't mind it if they started a week or two later. Closer to Labor Day wouldn't bother me, but no, it's awesome. It really is the best time of year for sports people, because football has so few games and they matter so much, and you have such a small window and opportunity. And so you watch the communities come together. It's still the most highly attended sporting event when it comes to high school sports. So there's always unique and great storylines every year that you try to learn. So definitely one of the most fun times of the year, except for the mosquitoes in down East Carteret County.
How does a Friday come together? How do y'all put that together?
So for me, it starts on Monday. When you look at the schedule for the upcoming games, you kind of map it out. You kind of figure out how many shooters you have and who can get a cluster of games. And then throughout the week, you start stacking the show. You find your most important game, your premier matchup, your battle royal, and then just kind of put the show together, format one day, do scripts another day, pre-production. So when Friday rolls around, just like a football coach, you have a game plan together. And then Friday, it's just going out and executing and getting what you can. And then, of course, things always go wrong, and you try to call audibles or make adjustments. And then Friday, 11:10, it comes whether you're ready or not, and your highlights are ready or not. So it's always a beat-the-clock moment, a lot of adrenaline, a lot of fun, good team camaraderie around the station. So always a great time. But it's like football coaches, it's a whole week of preparation getting it together. It just doesn't come together only on Friday nights.
Yeah, we have it lucky here. We go to one game and we stick it out for start to finish, and that's all we have to worry about. But you talk about the coordination it takes to go out and handle. You guys are going out to multiple places a night, aren't you, each of you?
Yeah, not unusual for me. I normally will shoot 3 games, 4, factor in drive time in between, and so, yeah, it's rare until you get to playoffs that I'll stay at a whole game, and then I kind of get bored because I'm so used to trying to time everything out right. And as soon as you get what you need to get busted over to the next game and hope it's not a blowout. So at least 3 games a night is what I try to do. Again, if you have staggered times, you can shoot even more, but a lot of fun, just the challenge of trying to get there with staying within the speed limit and the rules of the road and all those things.
Yeah, because you're looking for specific things. You can't just show up and shoot what you see. You're hoping to get a good representation of what that game is about.
Yeah, we call it creating the illusion, right? Even though they're only there a part of the game, we're trying to create the illusion we were there the whole game. So if somebody had a big game, you hope you get something of that to represent it, or you hope you get some kind of play that can represent what was the key to the game. Or there at the end, obviously, it's a close game. That is pretty cool too. But yeah, that's kind of how it all works out.
Is that the biggest high pressure, high wire act you all do all year, Brian?
Every night that you're in the sports realm is beat the clock. So basketball season, when I know, JJ, you always love the 4 games in one night. And your varsity's not starting till 9 o'clock, and you're just trying to get a couple of plays and get back and get it on the news. Then you throw in the fact that we do a 10 o'clock newscast. We have sports on there, so it's not the traditional just 11 o'clock we used to do. But really, it's like that all year long in sports broadcasting and just trying to beat the clock.
I'm sure you've got some stories on putting together the show on a Friday night. What was some of the ones that stand out to you over the years?
Oh, gosh, there have been, you can go through it, just really all the great finishes, the emotional games. For us, for me, personally, I love it when you have a game that is decided at the very end and emotions are running high and you're getting those interviews and everybody can't wait to get back and see it and on the TV. So, I mean, I could go through a list of them. I love trophy games. Mullet bucket's always great. One of my favorite moments is when East won it a few years ago with BJ, and they had the spray paint right there on the side, and they were painting it up, and it was like a haze of smoke everywhere of all the paint. So it's more moments like that than it is even plays in a game. I mean, obviously, there's some great individual athletic plays that are great, but sometimes it's the emotional moments that surround sports that really are the most memorable things.
Yeah, I think that's the best part. I mean, when you've been doing this for so long, you see games and you enjoy big plays, but it's nothing like the story around the sport. And you look at the last 10 years, and there's been an added wrinkle, an added thing to what you have to do each week with social media. How do you approach that as as an individual?
Very poorly. If you follow me on Twitter, it's almost a comedy act of its own. I do a lot of talk to text. My old fat farmer fingers don't do real well typing things out, so I rely on talk to text. And whether I have some sort of speech issue or whether my phone is just like my wife and only hears what it wants to hear, my texts, my tweets that I send out on Friday nights can sometimes be borderline hilarious. You have to do a lot of interpreting, but if you can do that, you can figure it out. But you have to be real careful of some school names like CB Acock. When Acock beats somebody or somebody beats Acock, you have to be real careful when it comes to the Twitter and the social media. Facebook, we put the blitz on afterwards. It's not like it's must-see television like it used to be. It used to be you rushed home or rushed to wherever you wanted to watch the blitz so you could see it on TV at a appointed time. Now, you just get to pick it off whenever you want. You're home watching, great, but then you can find it online later, social media later. So that's really changed the game when it comes to the immediacy appointment television, the adrenaline of everybody getting home to watch it. That's kind of changed some of the demographic as well. And the other thing is there's so many more outlets for kids to watch highlights. I mean, even JJ was putting out highlights for a while on his Twitter and on the platforms. And so there's more avenues for kids to see themselves in action. Everybody has their own camera when they have their phone, so there's more places for kids to see themselves on television nowadays, and so that's kind of changed the dynamic as well.
We've been watching you a long time, Brian, and when you watch Friday nights from August to December, you do as many shows as you do for as many years as you have. Some wacky stuff can go down, and I don't recall anything in particular, but I just remember some stuff where you got in late or another reporter got in late or you were waiting for highlights or something. What's some of the wackiest stuff you've dealt with?
Well, the night Ariel came in with a concussion and we didn't know at that point. She got hit on the sidelines of a game and showed up randomly in the middle of my first segment, kind of all dazed and confused. And while we don't want to laugh about head injuries, it was just, it was still kind of funny when we look back at it. And then I made her go out and interview her assaulters, the kid that hit her and the coaches. And so we did this big, you can find it on YouTube, this big feature on her taking her first real big hit on the sidelines. So that was one. Hey, look, I've had everything happen to me. Running out of gas. I had a key break on me. I was putting it into the ignition in my last game, and the key snapped. There's no, how do you start your car after that? So I had to get a ride from some people back to the station. That made for an interesting night. I've had flat tires. I've had animals that are no longer with us run out in front of me. I got stuck one night in Plymouth. I had to have some people push me out, and I felt so bad. I found this group of guys to help push the car out, and I spun the tires a little bit too much, and next thing you know, there's mud all over them. I just kept going. I felt so bad because I had to get back. But so, stuff like that happens. But yeah, there's been a lot of getting blocked in by people at games. There's been quite a few moments of trepidation where you're not sure you're going to make it.
I bet you roll with the punches a lot different now than you did the first 5 years, though, right?
Yes and no. You know, I used to bully my way through things in the past. I don't know if I try to think my way through things now a lot more. I'm not quite as svelte and brawny as I used to be back in the day. So yeah, it's definitely different, but still the same passion, still the same. I love the challenge of just trying to figure things out. So yeah, that's it's always a good time, and that's why I still do it. I mean, every year I keep thinking, do I want to keep doing this? Getting a little older, I got younger kids at home, but every year when it comes around, I still enjoy. Once I can get away from the house and the kids, that's the hard part. They want you to stick around, but once I get out the door and get headed to that first game, and now the juices still flow pretty good, and the challenge of getting everything done, the communication with the 5-6 other people you have out shooting, trying to find all the scores, trying to figure out what happened in the games, because it helps me with social media now when I can to follow it on Twitter and just figure out what happened in the game. So when I get back and I haven't seen the highlights except on the air when we're seeing them all together for the first time, I have an idea, working knowledge of what happened in that game. I can better tell people about it.
We'll take a quick break and we'll come back and talk more with Brian.
Eastern Carolina will rock Saturday, August 26th when Carteret County Speedway hosts the biggest classic rock festival featuring a Nantucket tribute including 3 original band members. With Sidewinder, also performing Built for Comfort, Thorn, and local artist Carson Gray. Tickets $20 in advance, VIP $50. Saturday, August 26th, the Classic Rock Festival at Carteret County Speedway. Details on Facebook. Tickets at carteretspeedway.com/rock.
Hi there, this is Brian Hanks with the Brian Hanks Show from Kinston, North Carolina. You are listening to the Paper Boys Podcast with JJ and Zack.
We're back with Brian. Brian is a New Yorker, but not a New Yorker in the sense that he's a New Yorker. He's a Hartford New Yorker. Tell us about Hartford, Brian, growing up there.
Yeah, it's about as far away from New York City as you can get. I mean, distance-wise, it's 3 hours, but culture, life. I grew up in the Adirondack Mountains on a dairy farm. So I went to a public high school with a graduating class of 36. So wow. My life was certainly as rural and country as you can get. And, grew up milking cows twice a day and running tractors, and it was a life I hated when I was doing it, but it taught me such valuable life lessons. I'm so happy I did it, and I like to go back now and hobby farming because I don't have to make a living off of it. But it was a great living growing up, but it certainly was also a great motivating factor for me to get an education and to, just find a better way of life to make a living.
You realized probably early on that life wasn't for you, huh?
Yeah, it fit me. It just wasn't. I watched my parents and my neighbors. I watched everybody just kind of struggle and with making that paycheck every week. And even though I liked the work to a degree, it just wasn't something that I saw myself wanting to do as like a 40 or 50-year-old. I mean, that just looked painful. And you just want to kind of choose a more fun way to live your life because life is so short. So, it's, again, I love it more now than I did when I was actually having to go out and, when it's 0 degrees and you still got to go. For me, I had to let some heifers out, which are basically teenage cows, and we didn't have indoor plumbing in that barn that I was taking care of, so I had to go chop a hole in the ice and, shovel manure by hand. And it was just, those nights I really wasn't thrilled with what I was doing. So that was, again, a major motivating factor to want to find a way to make a better living.
Yeah, you knew back then, shoveling snow, that you were going to end up in a place that did not have any of that year-round for sure.
Oh, I didn't even look at schools up north. I wanted to go somewhere warmer. And, one of the closest schools I applied to was James Madison in Virginia, and that was an 8-hour drive away. It was perfect for me. It ended up being the perfect school for me. But, no, I looked at a couple New York schools just because they were good at broadcasting, and I knew that's what I wanted to do. But as soon as I saw the price, it was cheaper for me to go out of state in New York than it was to go in-state. And so I definitely had no problems getting in the car and heading south.
You said you knew you wanted to do broadcasting, but did you always know that it was going to be sports-related?
Yeah, well, Yeah, but I always thought I was going to be a play-by-play guy.
Yeah.
Like, I always thought I was going to be, so the story I always tell is I wanted to be the third baseman for the New York Yankees.
There you go.
And so, but at 10 years old, I also figured out other people wanted to be the third baseman, and there might be a backup plan needed for when I quit playing third base for the Yankees. And I said, well, what's the next best thing than playing is either talking about it or coaching. And so I kind of wanted to do both, but broadcasting is where I kind of lean towards because I just really loved watching the games and learning the games from broadcasters. Bob Costas is a guy I just love to watch and love to listen to. So that's where I ended up kind of focusing my attention to. And, that's how it all started. So 10 years old, I had a pretty good idea. That's what I wanted to do.
So you graduate from James Madison and you end up right there in Harrisonburg, Virginia. And your first job as a weekend sports anchor and sports reporter. What was that like?
Yeah, it was eye-opening. I didn't really know I was going to do local TV news. I kind of just fell into it. When I was at JMU, I started working with the sports information department, learned how to be a pretty good photographer, and it kind of came naturally to me. And I had done some internships at some low-power television station, and I kind of worked in that kind of news format. And so I was looking for any job. I mean, I wasn't a kid who could sit there and wait for something to come along. It was either go work at Burger King or it was, find a job. And so the job came open in Harrisonburg. I got hired actually as an assignment editor. And I took the job because I needed it, but I had no idea what an assignment editor did. I showed up my first day, and the news director's like, okay, tell the reporters what they're doing today. And I said, that's what an assignment editor does? All right, well, let me see if I can figure this out. And I quickly learned I didn't know anything about anything outside of college life. And so I quickly learned that there was more to what TV viewers wanted than what was going on campus. So I had to learn about news and what was interesting to people. I got very lucky. 3 weeks in, the weekend sports anchor, a guy named Bob Corso, decided that he was tired of doing that. He asked me if I wanted to swap. I couldn't get the words yes out of my mouth fast enough, and so I got very lucky to jump into the weekend sports guy there and did that for 6 years and learned under a great guy, JJ Davis, who just taught me about the way to produce and make things interesting and looking for the interesting stories and unique angles and unique storytelling. And so I got to learn from a great guy, and I was in my college town. All my friends were leaving and saying, man, I wish I was still at college. Well, I was still at college, and I was getting paid. Now, I wasn't getting paid much, but I was getting paid. So that was really cool to be basically a 10-year college student and actually get paid a little bit for it.
I bet your body hates you for those years now, doesn't it?
Yeah. There's no doubt. And so, but everybody would come back and they'd stay with me. But I was working weekends, and so I always said that was God's way of keeping me alive. So I couldn't hang out with all my friends on the weekends until late at night, and so it was good for me to be very busy during weekends when I was still young.
I'm curious, going back to growing up in Hartford, you said you're about 3 hours from the city. From the time you were born to the time you left for college, how many times did you visit the city?
I think when I was 11, I went to go see the Yankees play. I think that was my first time. Not more than 5.
Wow.
I'm not even sure it was 5.
It just well been halfway across the country as far as you were concerned, right?
Well, right. And who you're a country kid. Who wants to deal with all the traffic and deal with all the, it was always the threat of you were going to get mugged or somebody was going to pick your pocket. I mean, it was all those country fears of what would happen in the big city. And so, I went down a few times, but not until I was older. I went and saw the Mets play when I was 16. I'm just trying to think of how many times I went. I've been more as an adult because once you leave a place, you figure out people want to always talk to you about it. And even though I wasn't from New York City, everybody wanted to talk about it. So I figured I better learn about it a little bit. So I've learned New York City through the years and stopped in, and I've had friends live there. And I go back there a lot more now, and it's not very much. But no, growing up, never, hardly ever. And, we were an hour from Albany, the state capital. That was a big city to us. And Glens Falls was Lake George, Saratoga, where the racetrack is. We had plenty to do up where I was from. So New York City was kind of like a bad word for people living upstate. We didn't want to associate with it.
So you go from New York to Virginia, and I'm curious, how did you end up here in East North Carolina, and how did you end up with WCTI?
Yeah, so one of the news directors I had in Harrisonburg ended up getting a job down here at WCTI. And so when the sports job came open, he offered it to my sports director first, JJ Davis. JJ came and looked at it. They hemmed and hawed over salary. They just didn't want to pay him. So as soon as he denied it, Doug Spiro then called me and said, it's yours if you want it. And for me, it was a healthy raise. It wasn't. I should have held out for more money, but I was just so happy to get a healthy raise and be a sports director and get to go cover the ACC and the Carolina Panthers and NASCAR and all these things that I kind of always wanted to cover. And so 19th September of 1998, I took the job and the place sight unseen. I'd never heard of New Bern. I'd never heard of Morehead City. I'd heard of Greenville and ECU, and I'd heard of Kinston for some weird reason, but I'd never heard of Atlantic Beach or Crystal Coast, nothing. I had no idea those places existed. So I came down here with the idea that I'd be here 5 years and get to cover all these neat things, and then I'd kind of figure out where I'd go after that. And 25 years later, I still haven't figured out where I'm going next.
You've mentioned over the years that one of the reasons you've loved it here and stayed here is being the Hartford, New York native that you are. There's a lot of similarities.
Yeah, I've always been a be where your feet is kind of guy. I would have stayed in Harrisonburg the rest of my life. I love the Shenandoah Valley. Still consider it my second home. I mean, the farm is first, and then the Shenandoah Valley is right there, and, of course, here. But things just didn't work out. It wasn't making the money I felt like I needed to survive. I was getting older, and so – but when I moved here, I've always been just happy with what I've been able to do here, from the great athletes that come out of this area to, getting to cover ECU and the ACC and all the things I've been able to do. And now I've had to travel and work hard and come up with creative ways. I've been to 2 Super Bowls, a couple of U.S. Opens, a heavyweight boxing championship, 2 Stanley Cups, a bunch of Daytona 500s. I've been able to do so many cool things the station has allowed me to do. I've never had time to even think about looking for another job, and I've always been a guy that if somebody really wanted me, here I am, he could make me an offer, but looking for a job is a full-time job, and I've always enjoyed the job I have. Even when I took on the news role, being a news anchor, it was a new challenge. It was fun. I've always just had so much fun learning and exploring. 25 years later, I'm still learning new things about this area all the time that are just fascinating to me, that I love to explore deeper and find answers and tell the stories.
Your job is like ours, Brian, and you've got there's really no in between. You're either where you're at for 1 to 2 to 3 years, or you're there for 20 to 25 to 30 years. Yeah. You've seen both sides.
Yeah, well, look, it's a stepping stone place. New Bern is where our station is located. And for younger people, again, I was a young person who just wanted to go have fun, and for younger people who come from bigger areas, bigger towns, this is not the place they want to necessarily be. There's not the attraction, all the things that they think they want to do. And then there's the whole pay scale thing. I mean, when this is a first job out of college, you're not going to get paid very much. And so that's kind of what they're dealing with when we hire young people. We're getting ready to hire a new sports person straight out of college, great kid. I think everybody's going to like him, but he's super talented. He might be the most talented sports person that we've hired as far as being ready to be on the air without having experience. But in 2 years, when his contract's up, if he stays here, it's only because he wants to. He's going to be that good where he's going to have a chance to really move up. And so it's just, what is the attraction? If you're not making a lot of money, I was lucky to come in as a sports director, so I was making a little bit more money. Still not what I should have been, but I was making a little more money where it was palatable. I could pay my bills and not have to worry about that. Most of these kids, they've either got to get help from the parents or somewhere, or they've got to have roommates, or they've got to find ways to financially survive and tack on student loans. And it's tough. So that's why it's such a stepping stone for a lot of people, just because financially it's just not solvent for a lot of people.
We'll take a quick break and we'll come back and talk more with Brian.
In 1959, you could buy a new house on the coast for about $12,000, a new car for $2,000, and fill it up with gas for only 25 cents a gallon. Everyone was cruising the beach, listening to the Platters, the Coasters, and a young guy named Elvis. And when it was time to eat, they all ended up at L's Drive-In in Morehead City. For over 60 years, L's has been serving up our world-famous super burgers, shrimp burgers, oyster burgers, and our mouth-watering fried chicken and barbecue. This coastal tradition of great food and friendly and fun customer service means L's is proud to be serving our 3rd generation of regulars. And we're not done yet. Drive in and pick your spot under the old oak trees, next to the hospital in Morehead City. Then prepare your taste buds for a coastal tradition like no other, providing the best food, service, and atmosphere in Morehead City since 1959. L's Drive-In, next to the hospital in Morehead City.
Hi, I'm Jimmy Paler, college baseball umpire, and you are listening to Paper Boys Podcast.
Brian, you mentioned you started in '98, so you've been around for a while. What's the biggest changes you've seen in just in the sports world in that time?
Yeah. When I arrived in our newsroom, September 7th, 1998, we had 2 computers that had the internet. Everybody else, we just graduated from typewriters. I used typewriters in Harrisonburg with the carbon paper and all of that, but we had 2 computers in the newsroom that had the internet. So the internet was still in its fledgling stages for finding information. Social media was not even close. Cell phones were barely a thing. So the technology changes. When I moved here in '98, we were still doing American and National League scoreboards on the news. You know what I'm talking about? You would do a highlight of a game, and then you'd show, let's check out the scores from around the major leagues. And you would show the scores from everybody. Now, we don't even show anything national in a sportscast unless there's a local guy involved somehow, or it's the big Super Bowl or a huge game that everybody's talking about. But the hyper-local sense of what we do, the technology that's changed, the TV is now last, right? They tell us that social media is first, and then when you get to the newscast, it's just kind of a summation of the day, and everybody's kind of seen it, so you're trying to give them a different perspective. So how we present the news and the technology is what's changed the most. We used to shoot on videotape, and now it's all tapeless. Now we use cell phone video. Like, it was a sin to use shaky, crappy, grainy cell phone video in the past. Now it's commonplace. Now it's like, we barely shoot our own stuff. We take it from somebody who just happen to have their camera in a vertical position, and we have to put wings on, and it's got our ability to accept what used to be mediocre stuff is now commonplace, which is kind of crazy to me. I see some of the stuff we put on the air, and I'm like, gosh, that would have never passed 20 years ago, 25 years ago, 30 years ago. So a lot of philosophical changes that go along with it, but yeah, it's definitely different. The equipment that we carry around. It's funny because these are the lightest cameras I've ever had, and I hear these young kids come in and complain like it's breaking their shoulder off. I'm like, you have no idea what it was like to carry a 25-pound camera along with a battery belt and a tape deck off your hip. And I mean, we were like camels walking around with all the stuff that we had on. And so as time progresses and things progress and technology gets better and lighter, I'm like, man, there's no way anybody can complain about this. But, it's all your perspective. But, yeah, these young kids, they want the little tiny handheld cameras that weigh nothing. And there's no way I can even mess with those.
Sometimes I feel like Matthew McConaughey out there, where I get older and these high school kids, they stay the same age as I cover them year to year. And I wonder, though, has the level of competition or athleticism or have sports in general changed in your time with TV?
Yeah, I think definitely that kids are more athletically prepared. Like, training is year-round. Weightlifting was still not a year-round thing. Personal trainers was definitely not a thing. Kids stay in shape year-round. It used to be you showed up for 2-a-days, and that's when you got in shape, and you'd learn the football skills. Kids are so much more advanced in their skill set. We never used to dribble a basketball like that. Going between our legs once was like considered a real fancy show-off move. And so now it's, if you don't do it, it's so the evolution of athletics has changed. I mean, I don't know if the competitive level of, a guy like Michael Jordan was just tear your head off just to win a game. And you used to hate your rival so much. And so there's so much more intermixing of athletes now, and AAU. And so all those different things certainly are a lot different than what they used to be. But the athletes themselves, look, it's just evolution. They're just better and they're better trained. I think it's the training more than anything that has changed. And football is year-round now. Spring football, 7-on-7 leagues. They never used to have any of that. So baseball is specialized. Basketball is year-round. So more year-round athletes. And I'm not necessarily saying that's good. I'm just saying that specialized players are a little more refined than what we had 30 years ago.
Yeah, I mean, you mentioned weight training, nutrition, injury treatment and prevention. It's all very different than it was 10, 15, 20 years ago.
Yeah, yep, no doubt. And, I mean, there was never athletic trainers at games. You'd have an ambulance maybe in the end zone on Friday nights, but no, diet, supplements, all those things have changed. But the personal trainer thing, I think, is something that's really taken a lot of kids and helps them maximize their potential, right? I mean, a lot of times you didn't know how good you were, but now you find out at an early age, and kids are identified at a much earlier age, which sometimes isn't a good thing. I think some teams miss out on some high school seniors who may develop later or don't have that training, and they're off the radar. And I always think of Kai Bowman right up the road at Havelock from you guys, and was going to go to UNC on a football scholarship, and so kind of got out of the basketball circles, and then decided basketball is what he wanted to do. He's very talented, but because he got off of the scouts' radar, he had a hard time getting back on it. So it's stuff like that has certainly changed. If you're not identified young anymore, there's almost zero chance you're going to get recruited if you develop later now.
Yeah, and you mentioned too how the idea of a rivalry has changed because these kids are often playing with each other on summer league teams or AAU teams, or social media has added a difference to how rivalries are treated. These guys these athletes are talking smack with each other online, back and forth between the games, and they know each other. I mean, here in this county, it's not uncommon to have an athlete from one school date an athlete from another school, or they're best friends with an athlete from another school. It definitely feels like the network between the schools is stronger than it ever has been.
I talked about hate earlier. We used to hate people because we didn't know them.
Right.
I mean, you read about a guy in the paper and you'd be like, that guy, I hate him because he's good. And so you never got to know them. And now that, for the better, is that I don't know if there's as much hate, but also what may not be for the better is transferring is much more acceptable now, right? We would have never transferred to the rival school or transferred somewhere else. I mean, you just stayed loyal to your school. And now it's not uncommon for kids to transfer all the time. And we see it in Carteret County. We've seen it through the years. Guys going between East and West and West to Havelock. And so the transfer thing is another thing that I haven't really liked about sports, the acceptance of it's okay to transfer. And I think the word loyalty in sports is a little overblown because I think loyalty itself seems to be it's a beneficial term, right? We use it when it benefits us, but it's not always a two-way street. So the transfer thing is definitely a lot more accepted and commonplace, and I'm not sure I like that as much. But that's again where we live in, and people. It's hard because you want people to have choices, right? It's like college athletes; they should get paid, but it changes the whole dynamic of the game from what we're used to. And now they're talking NIL in high school and stuff. It's just going to change all those dynamics. But we should be living in a free society where if someone is willing to pay you money for a service and it's legal, then yeah, you should be able to benefit off of that. It just opens up so many more unseemly things and hangers-on and people who are only trying to benefit off you. It just opens up so much more of those of Pandora's box. One of the things I always say is temptation is the hardest thing in life to deal with, right? Doesn't matter what you're talking about, whether it's the chocolate cake in the refrigerator. For some people it's gambling. For some people it's drugs. But when you have a choice, one of those choices is wrong and only going to be detrimental, but it still seems so good. Temptation is the hardest thing in life to deal with. It's why people have affairs. It's why people embezzle. Temptation is the hardest thing in life to deal with. And when you have young kids who are being offered things they wouldn't normally be offered when it comes to money or material things, it's hard for them to say no. And again, this is where some of this stuff is creeping into now with high school athletics and college athletics. It's hard for these kids sometimes. So I try not to blame them a whole lot when they're tempted by recruiting, when they're tempted by other things. It's just you hope somebody will get a hold of them and educate them on the choices that they can make so they can make an educated choice of what is right for them and best for them in not only the short term but the long term.
We're talking about the evolution of the athletes and their performance on the field or court. And Brian, you mentioned when you first started at WCTI 12 that you had like 2 computers that were hooked up to the internet, and now, kids are doing their own TikToks and Reels, and they're so much more media savvy, I guess. Have you noticed just interviewing kids how much better kids are just talking to you over the years?
Yes and no. Sometimes it's been worse because they talk their own language and it's accepted, and it's a language that you can't understand on television. At least I can't. Old guy can't understand it. Finna what? Finland what? So there's things out there that are allowed and are acceptable that I'm still not used to. I talk about, it used to be when you'd walk into a game or a gym or something, kids were almost intimidated, thrilled that the TV camera would want to see them. Now kids don't blink an eye about it, right? You walk right by, they don't even think twice. So it definitely has made kids more comfortable with themselves when it comes to what they look like, because they never could do that before. You had to wait and see what you looked like on the news when it came on. Now, I think about, JJ, when we were growing up, you would take your pictures on your camera, and then you'd have to take them to the photo mat and then wait 2 weeks to get them back, unless you had all sorts of Boku bucks that you could get the 1 hour develop. But you had to wait. Now, we take 27 pictures right there. I mean, we would never waste that film before. We'd take one picture and save it for the next one. Now you take 27 pictures on your cell phone, you go through and edit, see where you like it. You don't like it, you take another picture. So it's that instant gratification stuff now with a lot of people. And so I don't know if kids feel more comfortable interviewing. They're more comfortable being on media. But I don't know if it's made it easier to interview because, again, they talk their own language. And I try to protect kids a little bit from themselves. I never want to make them look bad intentionally. So, you deal with some of that sometimes. But the dynamic of interviewing people has changed. Kids are definitely different in how they feel about it when you're interviewing them.
We'll take a quick break and come back and talk more with Brian.
Eastern Carolina will rock Saturday, August 26th, when Carteret County Speedway hosts the biggest classic rock festival, featuring a Nantucket tribute, including 3 original band members. With Sidewinder. Also performing Built for Comfort, Thorn, and local artist Carson Gray. Tickets $20 in advance, VIP $50. Saturday, August 26th, the Classic Rock Festival at Carteret County Speedway. Details on Facebook. Tickets at carteretspeedway.com/rock.
Hi, my name is BJ Frazier, head football coach at East Carteret High School, and you are listening to the Paper Boys Podcast.
All right, we're back with Brian. Brian, you've been mentioning you've been doing this about 25, 26 years in sports. Around 2008, you had an opportunity to move over in news, start doing some anchoring there with Fox Eastern Carolina News, WFXI 8, and then Channel 12, WCTI News Channel. You did some 5:30 work as a news anchor. That started about 2012. So about the last 10, 15 years, you've been delving into the news side. What was the evolution to going from sports to news?
You ever see one of those like split rail fences and you try to hop over it and you're kind of sitting right in the middle of it and it kind of hurts in the crotch? That's kind of what happened, right? I had a little, not a midlife crisis, but I kind of hit the ceiling for sports as far as what I was going to get paid. And I was just like, I'm in my 30s. I just need to make a little bit more. And I didn't really feel like looking for a job. We bought the Fox station. And I just said, hey, I think I'd like to try it. And so they said, okay, well, we think we'd like you to try it too because we can probably save some money from hiring outside. So as I was trying to jump over that fence, they stopped me right in the middle and said, but you need to keep doing sports until we see that you can do news. So I was full-time sports guy, but would come back and anchor at 10. So that was another challenge. We talked earlier about beating the clock. And so that became a whole new challenge of trying to get back for the news. And then in 2012, they added the 5:30 news, and so that was another challenge. Then I lost my dedicated weekend guy, Derek Bain. He'd been here 7 years. He was running the sports department, and I could just rely on him. And they basically told him that he was not going to ever be the sports director. And he said, well, I'll go be a sports director somewhere else. And God willing, it's funny how these things work out. He gets a job in his hometown in Rockford, Illinois, and has been killing it ever since. And so, and oh, by the way, he's also moving into a news anchor role now there, which is kind of cool. So he left. I tried to get out of sports. They tried to run a one-man sports department for a couple of years. It didn't work. I ended up going back for a year and a half by myself until they hired somebody else. That didn't work out. And so they finally asked me to start running the sports department again. I said, you got to give me the things to be successful because I'm not going to do this halfway. And so we were able to hire Matt Trent, and that went well until we had to let Matt go for some traffic violations. He accumulated too many. And then we hired Ariel, and that went very well. And then we had Brett that came in after that, and now we're getting ready to start our new guy here coming up. So I've never really gotten out of sports, right? I just have been straddling that fence the whole time. And it's been great because I'm always going to be a sports guy, and that's who I am. It's just made my life a little more difficult. Then you throw in a wife and kids late in life. I knew I was never going to get married early. And if I had kids, they would have died. So I just figured it would be later in life, and it was even later than I thought. There was no pressure. I got to the point in my life, I had a great life. I mean, I was living the dream, going to all these events and doing anything I wanted, and it was great. So if it never happened, no problem. If it did happen, great. And I met the right person at the right time, married Jennifer, and we had kids when I was in my late 40s and 50, and so now I'm the grandpa dad, to with everybody around, but it's been great. But that's the new challenge now. And then the morning show opportunity came along a couple of years ago, and I knew having kids that later in life when they started school, working a night-side schedule and doing sports, I was never going to see them, and I already had a plan to move to a morning show eventually. Just that opportunity came quicker than I thought, and so 2.5 years ago I moved into the morning anchor role, but they still asked me to do the high school football show, so I've been doing both, and I still contribute a lot in sports when our other sports person is off for 2 days a week. So still heavily involved in sports, but news is what pays the bills right now. I'm on 3.5 hours in the morning, so you're getting more Brian North than you probably want to if you're a morning viewer. You still get him some in sports, and you still get him on Friday nights in the fall. So how much longer I can keep up this pace, I don't know. Kids are 2 and 4 now, and so it's run home every day to get them to daycare, get home in the afternoon, and get to hang out with them and play with them. And but it's getting harder and harder on Friday nights to say goodbye to them and get out and shoot football. But definitely committed and dedicated for this year. But the news thing is kind of, when I started doing news, I took it for money reasons, and I ended up liking it a lot more than I thought. So that was a pleasant surprise to me, and it's opened up a whole avenue of other stories that I love to tell. I love the mysteries of Eastern North Carolina. So that's allowed me to really expand out there beyond sports and tell some of the stories I really want to tell.
Well, I'm curious, with all those opportunities you did have to go into news, and I know you're enjoying dabbling in it right now, what did keep your foot in the sports world for so long?
I'm just a sports guy, right? Going back to that 10-year-old kid, I'm always going to be a sports person. Sports is still the greatest reality TV out there. It still has the best stories and the best drama and the best soap opera lines, and it's fun, right? It's not. I've never taken sports so seriously. I've never been a hardcore fan of a team. It's always been a one-way relationship, and I just could never get that committed to a team. But when you're in sports, you get to know people. And so I've always rooted for people, especially Eastern North Carolina, the number of great athletes that have come out of here. It's been that's what makes it so fun. And that's all the connections I have. When I cover news stories now, it starts with sports. I'm texting or calling somebody from my sports background that leads me down the path of finding the news answers that I need. So I'm always going to be a sports guy. Even if I didn't do any sports anymore, I still would call myself a sports guy. It's my style. It's why you see a lot of sports guys go into news, because they have the ability to ad-lib, they have the enthusiasm. They'll say things they're not supposed to say, and that's what the viewers like. And so I'll always be a sports guy, but news is my opportunity to have even more time to do it, express my views. I mean, look, when you're a sports person in a newsroom, news people don't know anything about what you do, but that's not the mirror of society. Our society, our viewers, they're a little bit of both. They want to know what's happening in their community, but they want to know what's happening in sports as well. So I feel like I'm a better reflection of what our viewers are looking for, and so I'll always be a sports guy.
You mentioned about how news has opened up this whole new world for you to find new stories, talk to new people. Brian's got one of the the best social media presences out there, especially in our area in Eastern North Carolina. He's Brian North, WCTI on Facebook, and it's just fun to see you. It feels like Wednesdays is your big day to go out, but maybe I'm just imagining that. But you go out every week and you just find these little pockets of our area and find these stories, and I'm sure that's tickled the journalist itch maybe more than the sports world did.
Everybody's got a story, and there's so many cool things that just driving around that I see, and that goes back to the sports background, right? For how many years you just drove around covering games, you get to know the roads, you get to know the communities, you see things, you always wonder, what is that? Like the Statue of Liberty in Morehead City that I used to drive by at Big Rock Stadium all the time, and I finally got a chance to stop in and try to figure out the mystery behind it, which I still haven't completely solved, but it led me down a whole path of the Boy Scouts of America and the replica Statue of Liberties that were made, 200 of them back in the 1949 to 1950, and I really thought we had one in Morehead City that was a mystery behind it, but it doesn't look like it. But it's because of sports it leads me down those avenues. And I love to tell the stories. I mean, it's all about two people can tell you a joke, and one person can tell it funnier than the other based on how they deliver it. Not that I'm great at that, but I feel like I'm an okay storyteller. So when I find these little things, I just try to find the interesting hook, the interesting angle about it, and then go talk about it. And everything seems to be tied to Eastern North Carolina. So anytime you see a story, there's somehow a tie to it to Eastern North Carolina, and I always love finding those relationships. I'll tell you an interesting. I just found out the other day, and I've been here 25 years, and I'd never heard this before. But the Marshall plane crash in 1970, we all knew that they played ECU, and then they flew back to Huntington. It was their only flight that year. They'd driven everywhere else, and the plane crashed. Well, the pilot of that plane that killed everyone on board is buried in Newbern at the National Cemetery. And I can't figure out for the life of me why this guy, who he was born in Wilson, grew up in Reedsville, but has no association over here, is buried in the National Cemetery in Newbern. He had military service. But I'm on this hunt to find out why this guy is buried in the National Cemetery as ECU is getting ready to play Marshall coming up here in a couple of weeks.
With you driving around on Wednesdays like you are here, I wonder if have you been able to reach Skip Waters-like levels of ENC geography skills?
I'll never reach Skip Waters' levels, but my knowledge is pretty good. And the funny thing is, everybody's now a GPS person, right? Everybody puts the stuff into their GPS. I still go by the old school landmarks, and so I still like to look up when I'm driving, and because I want to see things, right? I want to see things that other people don't see. So I still will take back roads. I know there's a faster way, but I'll still take a back road because I want to see something or see something different. And so I'll never be at that Skip Waters level, but I'm pretty proud of my geographic knowledge of Eastern North Carolina. Yeah, but there's still things I'm missing out there. There's still things I want to find, but every day is a good day to learn. And today I'm out driving around Onslow County at the taping of this and getting football coaches, but I'm also finding out new information about the Marine Museum of the Carolinas. It's been in the works for 25 years, and they're finally going to start breaking ground. And I'm always looking for unusual things on the side of the road I can take a picture of and let people know about. But I always like that. I never want to just take a picture and say, what's that? I always want to try and find more information as to why it's interesting and unique. So I guess that's the storyteller inside.
All right, buddy. We're going to see you on the sidelines on Friday nights this fall. Thanks for joining us.
All right, you got it, boys.
I'm Ryan Kelly.
I'm Lynn Schultz.
And we're the hosts of the Senior Moment podcast.
Each week we bring you conversations with experts right here in our community about the common and uncommon challenges facing our aging population and caregivers.
We discuss the challenges of caring for a loved one with dementia, as well as the importance of health planning, family history, and much more.
Join us every week for Senior Moment, streaming now on Spotify, YouTube, and at CarolinaCoastonline.com.